Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome.
Get paid for your pad. 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 Get paid for your pad.
Before learning about Aviva IQ, I used to spend so much time managing my guest communications manually. Now, with Aviva IQ's easy-to-use automated service, my workload has reduced by 80%. Did I mention it's free? Automate your Airbnb messages now at www.avivaiq.com.
Hi everybody and welcome to another news episode of Get Paid for Your Pad. Today we have a new co-host. His name is Noah Neiman. He is one of the co-founders of Hostfully, and he's also the head of products. So Noah, welcome and thank you for joining.
Thank you, Jasper.
It's good to meet you. And do you want to give a quick introduction of yourself and your involvement in Hostfully?
Sure. I started with Hostfully as a co-founder. I'm a former Apple employee and an engineer and an avid traveler. And when David and Margot, my co-founders, approached me with this idea, I thought it was just fantastic. I had experienced vacation rentals as a renter and a host. And as a renter especially, I just found the whole arrival process, check-in process, and experiencing the local environment process very frustrating. And you would get there and there would be this 3-ring binder with laminated sheets stuffed with all kinds of different information. And I would actually read it and be very disappointed in the content and the quality. When David and Margot approached me with this concept of an app that would effectively replace that 3-ring binder guidebook, I thought, man, this is just a brilliant idea, and I'd love to join the team.
That's great. Before we got onto the call, we were chatting a little bit. You recently had a pretty interesting experience during your travels using VRBO in France. Do you want to elaborate on that a bit?
Yes, I'd found a VRBO in France, and it seemed like just a beautiful place, and the price was much better than I could find for anything else of a similar quality. And so I booked a VRBO. I also booked 2 different Airbnbs on the same trip, one in New York and one in Paris. But the VRBO didn't have the VRBO payments enabled. And so in trying to pay for the listing, the owner wanted me to do a bank transfer, which for a European is very simple and free, and you can do it, on your phone. You can do it anywhere. But for an American, is expensive and challenging. You have to do it in a bank, and I wasn't sure if this was a fraud, so I didn't want to do that ahead of time of the trip. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just have to pay her cash because she wouldn't take, a credit card and she wouldn't take PayPal. And so when I arrived with cash, I thought it would be very convenient to arrive with 2 €500 notes. And she wouldn't accept them because she said they were too large. And she then asked me to go to the local bank to exchange them for smaller denominations, which on the afternoon in France, half the banks were closed. The other half wouldn't exchange them because I wasn't a customer. So it was very challenging. It just points to, the challenges that a host and a guest will have when you're not using, Airbnb, or you're not using the VRBO payment system and you have international guests. If you compare it to staying at a hotel, this would never, ever happen. And it's just something that I think, hosts should be aware of to try and make their accommodations more efficient for foreign guests.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I don't understand is if you book on VRBO, like you're supposed to pay through the platform, no? I've never used it. You can, but she didn't have that enabled. Oh, so there's an option to...
There's an option to do that, yeah. And it's relatively new.
Interesting.
So in the past, years when I would use VRBO, frequently I would pay with a check or pay with PayPal. But those wouldn't work in this instance either. So really cash was my only option.
And how does VRBO make any money then?
They make money just from listings. So the host pays a fixed amount to just put the listing on VRBO.
Right. Got it. Okay. I had an interesting experience too. I stayed in New York for 2.5 weeks. Paid about, what was it? Quite a lot of money for it. I mean, I was sharing it with a friend, close to $3,600
Wow.
for what was it? I think a 2-week stay. It was a really nice apartment in Soho. But then after I left, the host hit me up with a request for a $300 cleaning fee.
Wow.
Now he didn't charge a cleaning fee to begin with, so I figured the cleaning was just included in the price. But yeah, he sent me a request for another $300, and I responded, and I told him over text. I told him you should be charging a cleaning fee ahead of the stay, as separately if you want to have a cleaning fee, and otherwise it's included in the price. But then he was telling me that the apartment was dirtier than what you could expect or something. So I don't know exactly what that means. But anyway, I've never had that happen before. So we'll see how it happens. Maybe he's going to involve Airbnb and trying to claim that money. We'll see how it goes. But let's dive into the news of this week. I think there's one story that's kind of been dominating the news, and that is the recent ad that the hotel industry in New York has created. I think it's going to air actually today, the day of this recording, July 31st. By the time it goes live, it's probably been airing for a few days. What they're doing is they're trying to, again, put Airbnb in a very dark place. They're trying to relate it to terrorism now, because apparently one of the bombers in Manchester, when there was a terrorist attack there, that person apparently stayed in an Airbnb, and now they're using that to sort of instigate some fear in people and say, like, the Airbnb is dangerous, like, you don't know who's in your building, are you safe, and that kind of stuff. Like, really, it's kind of crazy. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a giant mistake for whoever's paying for this ad. The risk that this comes back to, reflect negatively on them, I think is rather large. The article I read actually stated that the terrorist did stay in a short-term rental, but it was not an Airbnb. And so the link is even more tenuous at best. I don't know.
That's a very good point. Indeed, I didn't see that, but it's actually stated in the article. It wasn't an Airbnb unit even. But even if it was, I mean, has a terrorist ever stayed in a hotel?
Exactly.
Right?
I would assume so.
Yeah, I mean, it's right. I think
or eaten at a fast food restaurant, or bought gas at a gas station, or rented a car, or done all kinds of things.
Took the train, took a bus, went to the supermarket.
Right.
So I guess the message is we should all just when we wake up in the morning, we should lock the door, stay in your bed the whole day, because otherwise, you're not safe. Which is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm surprised that someone actually paid to make this ad, let alone run this ad. And I'll be surprised if it doesn't get taken down very quickly after it goes up.
Yeah. There's an Airbnb spokesman, Peter Schottenfels. He responded to the ad. He said it's an outrageous scare tactic by the big hotels, who themselves have a long history of lodging people who engage in acts of terror. A while ago, the short-term rentals didn't really exist. So, there was only one place to stay, and that's the hotels, right? So he basically said that some of the terrorists involved in September 11th were staying in hotels, the terrorist attack in Paris. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this goes down, but I think they're kind of crossing a line here.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you have anything else to share on this topic?
No, just to reiterate that I wouldn't be surprised if the ad doesn't run for very long, if it runs at all.
Right. There's another news story about one of Airbnb's competitors in China. It's called Tujia, and it's growing very, very fast. It saw triple-digit growth since 2016, which means that it's growing much faster than Airbnb at this point. And one of the interesting things about Tujia is the way that they distribute. They've tied up with WeChat, which is a very popular messaging app in China. And they've also partnered with Ctrip, which is the biggest travel website. I guess you can compare it maybe to something like Priceline or Kayak or Skyscanner. they're using all these different channels to distribute the listings, and I think that's probably what contributes to their growth. And I was kind of thinking, be interesting for Airbnb. I don't know why they're not doing that, but if you're searching on all these search engines, you're searching for hotels, why not add vacation rentals? Like Google recently actually started adding vacation rentals to their search results. So I think that could be an interesting move for Airbnb.
Yeah, I remember 2 years ago at the Airbnb Open, they mentioned that growth in Asia was one of their main goals. I haven't seen numbers to support success or not in that area for the last 2 years. I see a lot of local competitors trying to emulate the Airbnb business model. And I've seen in other industries, American companies or foreign companies failing without a local partner. And I wonder if Airbnb is going to go that route or try and, stick it alone by themselves.
Yeah, it's very hard to, especially in countries like China and Brazil as well, where, the government is fairly involved in a lot of businesses. And there tends to be a fair amount of corruption as well. So it's kind of hard to get businesses going there. But we'll see. It'll be interesting to see. Airbnb is expecting its biggest night ever in South Carolina. And that's because there's going to be a total solar eclipse. Now, I've never seen a total solar eclipse. Have you?
I have seen a total solar eclipse in Stuttgart, Germany. It was probably around 2000. And it was amazing. If anyone has the opportunity to see this eclipse, I recommend they try and go. It wouldn't surprise me if Airbnb doesn't break a record in many states. The eclipse is going to start in Oregon and travel all the way across the United States. So it's going to hit 8 or 10 states, I believe.
And it's going to happen on August 20th. So there's still plenty of time to find a place to stay if you're interested in seeing the solar eclipse. They're saying that they're expecting bookings on Airbnb to be nearly 5 times higher as usual. That's probably going to increase the price quite a bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, the path of the eclipse is not really transiting any giant metropolitan areas. So the places where the eclipse will be are going to be rural places with, a hotel or two, which I imagine would quickly fill up, give a lot of local residents an opportunity to rent out bedrooms or entire houses on Airbnb. Yeah. And again, I would encourage anyone to see it if they have the opportunity.
And also for hosts who are staying in that area, these are the type of events that you would miss in terms of raising your price. Because, if you're not aware of that this thing is going to happen, and suddenly everybody's raising the prices and your place gets booked like 3 months in advance and you're wondering, why do I have a booking? This is how I found out about some of the conferences in Amsterdam. Like I would get bookings for the first week of September, like literally like 4 or 5 months in advance. And so I started looking into it, and turns out there's like one of the biggest events in the country was being held that week. So, and the automated pricing apps that you can use, they automatically adjust for these types of events. That way you're always safe.
Do you use any of the dynamic pricing functions, features, companies?
I've always been using Beyond Pricing.
And did it work for you in this case with the conference in Amsterdam?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, this is before these apps even existed. I'm talking like, when I started in 2012 and I was spending several hours a week trying to optimize my prices and using all sorts of formulas and stuff. It was quite challenging.
Have you ever tried the Airbnb internal service?
I have actually, and I actually got a question from one of the listeners regarding the smart pricing app. We'll get into that after we're done discussing the news. We have a few more articles to go through. I found a funny article on Business Insider that talks about the morning routine of Brian Chesky, who's the CEO of Airbnb. So I always find it interesting to get a little glimpse into the lives of these, the CEOs of these big companies, because obviously now that their lives are pretty crazy, right? I mean, they have so much to do. They have to be very efficient with their time. And so he has a morning routine, the article states. Here's what he does. He makes a list of everything he wants to accomplish that day in the morning. And then he groups all the tasks together. And then he asks himself for each group, what's the one action that could take care of all the different items in the group? And then you repeat that process for each of the groupings. And then you refine that process until you have just a few big tasks that will basically take care of all the things that you need to do. So if you have a list of 20 things or so, you end up realizing I actually don't need to do all these 20 things. If I do 3 big things, then the other 20 things will kind of happen as outcomes. So that's Brian Chesky's morning routine, which is similar to one of the investors on Shark Tank. I don't know if you've heard of Shark Tank. I find it a pretty interesting show.
Yes, sure.
People who have ideas, they pitch their ideas to a bunch of investors, and it's always interesting to see the responses and their analysis. Her name, Barbara Corcoran, she has a similar way to deal with to-do lists. Do you ever use a to-do list?
Absolutely. It's critical. I was going to ask if the article mentioned if Brian uses any app or software. Is he using pen and paper or just notes in a computer?
Yeah, it doesn't say that. Do you use an app?
I don't. I use notes in a notebook.
Okay. Old school.
Old school. I mean, we use software to do features and functions for Hostfully, and we have projects in that software. But for most things, I will jot down a note and cross it out when it's over.
Hosts, if you're anything like me, you have multiple standard messages you send to every guest. I used to copy paste those messages every time I had a new guest. But then I learned about Aviva IQ, and I'm an absolute fan. I copied my repeatable messages into Aviva IQ and told it when I want each message to be delivered. Now, all my guests get personalized check-in messages and personalized check-out messages at the exact time I want them to, automatically. I also use Aviva IQ to send a message to guests when a vacancy exists after their scheduled checkout day and invite them to stay longer. It's amazing how it's turned into free money for me on multiple occasions already. So sign up for free at www.avivaiq.com. You'll be glad you did.
Awesome. So let's go into the questions that have been submitted by listeners. I got quite a few this week. So I picked a few, and the first question has to deal with turning in damages. This is a question by Brooke in Get Paid for Your Pet Facebook group that you can join if you want. There's a guest who spilled some red wine on a table runner. The runner cost $35. I do have a $100 security deposit, but I'm worried that my guest will leave a bad review in retaliation for me taking part of the deposit. That actually brings up an interesting point, because I've never been charged any money after I stayed in Airbnb. And, now that the host is trying to charge me $300, I haven't written my review yet. And it kind of makes me feel, I feel like it's a little unfair. So it kind of influenced my opinion on the host. I haven't decided what I'm going to do for the review. It's a valid concern, I guess. The question really is, should I ask for that money back or not? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that you should. I wouldn't want to set a precedent where people think that they can damage a listing and not have to pay for it. The risk is real for the review, but I think with Airbnb's mediation, you could request that review be removed because you feel the review is unfair because it gets the charge for the damage. It is a struggle. Something I struggle with myself is when I have a less than 5-star experience, what exactly do? I want to protect future travelers. I want to help the host become a better host. And yet I feel a little bit guilty about leaving a 3-star, 2-star, 1-star review.
Yeah, I think in this case, the cost is $35. The person has a security deposit, and I think I'm not sure if everybody understands how the security deposit works, because it actually works different than I thought it did. I've never charged the security deposit myself. I've never really had any significant damages. But when you charge the security deposit, you're not actually guaranteed to receive that money. The way it works is, before the next guest arrives, or within 14 days, you have to request the money. And then the guest can choose whether to accept or to decline. And if the guest declines, then Airbnb will mitigate or Airbnb will get involved and come to a resolution. So even if you're charging a security deposit, you're not guaranteed to actually get that money. Like if Airbnb investigates, you have to supply documentation and stuff. So for all the hosts out there, if you do have any damages, like make sure you take pictures, and also make sure to put in your claim immediately before your next guests arrive. And that could be a pretty tight time window, because I used to have back-to-back bookings all the time. And so the guests leave, they check out at 12 p.m. and then the next guests arrive at 3 p.m. So you only have like 3 hours to put in this security claim. And then if you're remote hosting and you have a cleaning person, now you might not even be aware of the damage. It's a bit tricky, but in any case, yeah, I think you should totally, that's the reason why you're using a security deposit, right? It's because you want to be refunded for damages. Also, this host is not really making a lot. Like the total amount for the stay was only $120, so $35. That's like 30% almost of the stay. In my case, when I was staying in New York, I paid like $3,600. Now, if I break a wine glass, which I actually did, and the host is trying to charge me for it, if I'm paying $3,600 and you break like a $5 wine glass, then I would think that's not really a big of a deal. But if you're losing 30% of the amount that you're receiving, then I definitely think you should try to get that damage covered.
I like that reasoning.
Yeah, and I wouldn't worry too much about the review. Even if the guest does leave a bad review, you can respond to it. So you can say like, well, I think the response is based on the fact that I charged for some damages, which, I think is fair. And, I think people also understand that, if you have tons of good reviews and then there's one person who leaves a bad review, it's not necessarily going to destroy your Airbnb business. As long as you don't have too many. I think everybody knows that. Some people just, it's very hard to satisfy them. Having the odd like 3 or 4 star review, I think it's not really a big deal.
I do wonder about the superhost status, if that is still impacting the status. My understanding was, at least 2 years ago, is if you had one negative review and you were a superhost, they would remove you from the program even for one negative review.
No, the way it works is you need to get 80% 5-star reviews. Let's say you have 10 groups of guests, 10 reviews. Could be more than 10 groups because not all groups leave reviews. But let's say you have 10 reviews and you have 8 5-star reviews and then 2 1-star reviews. You're still eligible for the Superhost program. I think what you're referring to is cancellations. Like you can't cancel any reservations. So you cancel one reservation, you can't be Superhost anymore unless you contact Airbnb and explain them that something happened, like some extreme circumstances. All right, let's move on. We're almost at the end of the podcast, but I have one other question that I wanted to address. It has to do with the Airbnb smart pricing. This question comes from Nina. She's saying that Airbnb pricing constantly suggests a lower pricing. She feels like it doesn't really reflect the optimal price for her listing. And I think that's correct. I've heard this actually a lot. I've noticed it myself as well. The thing is that Airbnb has 2 hats on. They have to think about the interest of the guest and the interest of the host at the same time. So they're not really in a good position to advise on pricing. And so what happens is that they generally recommend a lower price than what would be optimal because they want to keep the interest of the guests. They like to brand Airbnb as a cheaper alternative to hotels. So they also, I think it's also in their interest to sort of, keep the prices a little bit on the lower end. Do you have any experience with that?
I have not experienced it, but anecdotally I've heard the same.
And
I can see how there's a little bit of a conflict for all the reasons that you mentioned. Airbnb wants to steal dollar share from hotels. And there's a big conflict between those 2 groups, as the story that we mentioned earlier points to. And so you're right. Airbnb does have an incentive to keep the prices low. And I would recommend that your listener who asked the question use a third-party service like Beyond Pricing, and there are several others, and see if she feels like they're more accurate and relevant for her listing.
Absolutely. That would be my advice as well. Well, thanks, Noah, for co-hosting this episode with me. And good luck with everything at Hostfully. And hope to speak to you again another time.
Thank you, Jasper. It was nice speaking with you.
All right. And for the listeners, thanks for listening. And of course, Monday, there will be another episode of Get Paid for Your Pad. I hope to see you then.
Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad.